From the WATE.com Digital Center, answering your legal questions, this is Ask Isaacs. Now, here's Lori Tucker and attorney Greg Isaacs.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Glad you are with us. We have been covering a trial. Greg, you've been keeping up with this as well. It's a death penalty case involving a man named Sean Finnegan, accused of luring a woman, 36 years old, Jennifer Paxton, to his home with the promise of giving her a place to stay, but things went really horribly wrong after that. So let's talk about this case, bring you up to date on what's going on.
Well, Lori, here in East Tennessee, it's rare when a prosecutor files a notice of death seeking capital punishment. And, this is one of those cases that's different. And when you see prosecutors in this region file a notice of death, typically you have facts that are pretty heinous, atrocious, and cruel. And that's kind of the backdrop that we have here. They lure this person here, yet Finnegan and his significant other, who's already flipped.
Correct. Her name is Rebecca Dishman. Do you want to hold that thought for a moment?
Sure.
Because we have a soundbite from her on the witness stand, and it's pretty bad against the defendant. Let's hear what she had to say. Rebecca Dishman.
I told her that I wish I could let her leave, but I didn't have any way of letting her go, and it really upset me.
Did she ever tell Mr. Finnegan she needed to leave or wanted to leave?
Yes.
What was his reaction?
He told her that as he was killing her, that she wasn't going anywhere, that she was going to die.
And there you see Sean Finnegan looking on. As Dishman said, as he was killing her, he said, "You're not going anywhere. You're going to die." Powerful statement.
Facts are atrocious, and basically they lured this person in with the promise of food and shelter. And what they did, they chained her to a bed with a dog collar, deprived her of food, water, beat her, tortured her, raped her. There are also allegations of destruction of the corpse, just very extreme, horrific facts.
And that's one of the charges he is facing, abuse of a corpse, in addition to first-degree murder. Let's talk about why this has, as if that isn't explanation enough, why this meets the merits of a capital case.
Well, there are two ways, and the law has changed recently. For years, the only offense under Tennessee law I'm talking state offenses, not federal, espionage and treason are capital cases if you commit those acts, but was first-degree premeditated murder. So that was a case that a prosecutor could seek a punishment of death. Mm-hmm. Now, in May of 2024, Governor Lee signed a bill making rape of a child under certain circumstances a capital offense. So Tennessee has joined Florida as being one of only two states that have capital punishment for that criminal offense. That's going to be interesting because the Supreme Court addressed the issue of rape and capital punishment in Coker versus Georgia, and they said it violated the Eighth Amendment against cruel and unusual punishment, but that's kind of an aside. But here, what factors are at play? You have a situation where it is a crime that's heinous, atrocious, cruel. And when you have the death penalty, what happens? The prosecutor files a notice, and they file one of the statutory enhancement factors, and that is the predicate.
And there are lots of factors to consider.
And there are a lot. There's 17 that they can choose from, and then the defense can rely on, if there's you go to a capital phase, if there's a conviction for first-degree murder, mitigating factors, and the jury would have to find unanimously that the aggravating factors outweigh the mitigating factors beyond a reasonable doubt. But factor 13, defendant knowingly mutilated the body of the victim after death. Yeah. Clearly, we have that here. I'm not sure if these prosecutors use this, but clearly to me it cries out as a crime that it's the hack factor, heinous, atrocious, and cruel. So, you
Yeah,
know,
that's number 5, and it says it involved torture, heinous, atrocious, or cruel, as you just said, and that it involved torture or serious physical abuse beyond that necessary to produce death.
yeah, so you
So
know,
disturbing.
this is a disturbing case. It's interesting. You know, I know Court TV is covering this case, and I think
We're
you are
streaming it
streaming
live, and I'll remind you again, but we're streaming it live on WATE.com.
And it's kind of a deja vu, and I'm going to be talking about this case tomorrow on Court TV. But in watching the prosecutors, Kevin Allen and Sarah Keith, their names probably sound familiar because they were longtime prosecutors here in Knox County.
Yes.
That handled a number of high-profile cases.
Interesting. Well, we'll be watching that. But in the meantime, when it comes to the death penalty in Tennessee, executions are pretty much on hold right now. Let's talk about why.
You know, the business of capital punishment is very complicated. Just because, Lori, a defendant, once there is a verdict that calls for death, you have a number of constitutional and statutory appeals. You have your direct appeal to the Court of Criminal Appeals, the state court, then to the Tennessee Supreme Court. Then after those are exhausted, you can file a post-conviction proceeding where you typically allege that your lawyer was ineffective. Then you have a hearing in the trial court, then goes back to the Court of Appeals
All these
and the
steps.
Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Then after that's exhausted, then you can go to the district court
Okay.
and seek relief under a habeas corpus. Then you would have relief to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. And then, once execution nears, and it's interesting in Tennessee because a lot of factors, and one is lethal injection and the availability of those drugs.
Correct.
That's kind of crawled to a standstill, and I think is actually on hold based on the lack of availability of the cocktail for lethal injections.
Right. And can the prisoner, if you will, can the convict choose their manner of death in Tennessee?
They can, and you could have firing squad, electrocution, but and then once you get past the Sixth Circuit, you can go to the U.S. Supreme Court, and there's actually justices are assigned particular circuits and states. Here in the Sixth Circuit in Tennessee, we have Justice Kagan,
Right.
and then you see a lot of 11th hour appeals. And the big thing that people start harping on and scrambling when an execution is imminent is, does it violate the Eighth Amendment prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment? And that's where you go into the problem of availability of the drugs for the cocktail. But the death penalty is rare in Tennessee.
Yeah, 45 inmates are currently on death row. There are 44 males, 1 female. 7 have multiple offenses. 9 East Tennesseans are currently on death row. And we do remember the lone woman, Krista Pike.
Krista Pike, the lone woman from here. But, again, 9 individuals from East Tennessee. The longest or the oldest is Oscar Smith, 74 years old. And the longest on death row is Larry McKay. And he's been on death row, awaiting execution since 1983.
Wow.
And,
So just appeal after appeal after appeal?
Yes.
Wow.
And when you have the ultimate punishment, when you have a sentence of death, then you have a heightened standard of due process. And so then, the defense has basically a blank checkbook in terms of what they can do. Experts are now more readily available at state expense. If you can't afford a lawyer, you don't get 1, you get 2 at state expense. So what you really see is a higher level of litigation. And oftentimes, that's why victims don't want the death penalty, because one, it takes an inordinate amount of time to wind its way through the appellate procedures and the hoops before there's finality. So closure is something that you don't get.
Yeah.
Then ironically,
But they're alive.
but they're alive. And ironically, the defense gets more resources to attack the case than they would have had it not been. And think
Very
about,
interesting.
and when you look at the sentences in proportionality, the female co-defendant, Dishman, she received a life sentence plus 50 years. So she's
Well,
not.
she made a plea and decided to support the defense.
She did, but in that case, you're going to have some finality. She's never going to get out of jail. But this case with Finnegan, if he does have the death penalty, it could go on for a number of years or a number of decades. Now, it's interesting too. So here's how it works. So first, you would have to have a conviction for first-degree murder. If there's a lesser included, like second degree, then you would not go to a hearing on capital punishment.
Obviously,
So-
but this is not a second-degree murder case, do you think?
Obviously,
At all.
this is, and let's talk about what first degree is, a premeditated, knowing, intentional killing of another, and premeditation equals planning. Obviously, they lured this person into their home, chained her to the bed with a dog collar, raped her repeatedly, beat her repeatedly, tortured her repeatedly. So obviously, you've got a first degree. Now, when you go to the sentencing phase, the mini trial where the state's got to prove aggravating factors outweigh the mitigating factors. If that cannot be proven unanimously or finding unanimously by the jury, then it goes back to the judge to decide life with or life without parole. But interesting, now some of the recent high-profile capital cases that have attracted a lot of media attention. I remember covering the Parkland shooting case in Florida,
Yep.
where all those dozens of people were killed. And if there ever was a case that I thought cried out for the death penalty, that was one. And the jury decided not to impose a
A
sentence
lot of
death.
people surprised by that.
Yeah, so you never know. But
You never know, but we do have the cases here. We mentioned Krista Pike, 1996. I had not been here very long, and that was the Job Corps student, Colleen Slimmer, kind of a love triangle situation. And then we have the case that so many of you, this shook our community, and this was the Christian Newsom case. LaMarcus Davidson got the death penalty back in 2009.
one
I
that
can't
was
believe
just
it's
a
been that
horrible,
long.
horrible case that
Yeah.
really just rocked this community,
It
and that individual is still on death row. But when you look at it, again, prosecutors here use the death penalty very judiciously, and that they look at it very solemnly. And let me tell you how they typically do it. They consult with the victims. Tennessee, we amended our Constitution to have a Victims' Rights Act. You have the right to be involved in plea negotiations. You have the right to be heard. You don't have the right to have an ultimate veto. You have the right to be present at each and every court appearance. But what you have is you'll have prosecutors, closely consult with families to see what their wishes are. And then they'll make a very difficult decision because they want to make sure this is something that's proportional, something that would justify capital punishment, that wouldn't be subjected to a collateral Eighth Amendment cruel and unusual punishment challenge.
And we have some families who say, you know what, we would rather this person sit in a cell for the rest of their lives and think about what they did.
And that happens more often than you would think.
Yeah.
And prosecutors who have a very difficult job, they do a good job of keeping those discussions and communications confidential. So you typically don't know unless you're representing somebody. But that goes a long way. But once that decision is made, then it really ups the ante. And if you're the prosecutors, you want to make sure that you don't make a mistake in terms of your experts providing the evidence. But this case is one, unfortunately, that has attracted a lot of national attention for all the wrong reasons.
All right, we'll talk more about it at 5:30.
Let's do it.
All right, thanks for being with us. And don't forget, you can live stream this trial. We're live streaming it on WATE.com.